The first time I learned my children had sold my house was when a stranger walked into my kitchen, placed a set of blueprints on the table, and asked why I had not moved out yet. I stared at him, thinking I had misunderstood. He was wearing polished brown shoes, a navy sport coat, and the uneasy expression of a man who had expected to find an empty building instead of a 63-year-old woman making blueberry pancakes. Behind him stood two younger men carrying measuring equipment. One of them was already looking around my kitchen as though he were deciding which wall to tear down first. "Excuse me?" I said. The stranger glanced at the house number beside the back door and then checked something on his phone. "This is 1847 Willow Creek Road, correct?" "It has been for 31 years. His expression tightened. Then there must have been a communication problem. We were told the property would be vacant by this morning. I switched off the burner beneath the pancakes. Told by whom? He hesitated before sliding a business card across the table. His name was Daniel Price, and he worked for a development company based in Charlotte, North Carolina. "We purchased this property last month," he said carefully. "The closing documents were completed on September 18th. For several seconds, the only sound in my kitchen was pancake batter sizzling in the pan. My house had been sold 3 weeks earlier. And apparently, I was the last person to know. My name is Evelyn Parker. I had lived in that white farmhouse outside Asheville since 1995, when my husband, Thomas, and I bought it with money we had saved for nearly 12 years. The house sat on 11 acres of sloping land, with oak trees in the front and a narrow creek running behind the old red barn. It was where we raised our children. It was where Thomas taught our son, Michael, to repair an engine. It was where our daughter, Allison, practiced walking in high heels before her first school dance. It was where we celebrated birthdays, graduations, engagements, and every Thanksgiving for almost 3 decades. And it was where I held Thomas's hand when cancer took his final breath 2 years earlier. The house was not simply a piece of property. It was the physical record of my entire adult life. More importantly, it belonged to me. At least, that was what I had believed when I woke up that morning. I studied Daniel's face, searching for any indication that this was some tasteless joke. "There has been a mistake," I told him. "I never listed this property. I never signed a sales agreement, and I certainly did not attend a closing." Daniel slowly closed the folder he had been carrying. "Mrs. Parker, are you saying you did not authorize the sale?" "That is exactly what I'm saying." The two surveyors exchanged uncomfortable looks. Daniel asked them to wait outside. Once the back door closed behind them, he opened the folder again and removed a copy of the deed. The document showed that Willow Creek Development Group had purchased my home and land for $680,000. My name appeared at the bottom. So did a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. But the letter E leaned too far to the right, and whoever had written my last name had connected the K and the E. I had never connected those letters in my life. "This is forged," I whispered. Daniel did not argue. Instead, he turned to another page. The sale was completed through a power of attorney. He pointed to a name. My stomach turned cold before I finished reading it. Michael Parker. My son. There are certain discoveries the mind refuses to accept all at once. It delivers them in pieces, protecting you from the full weight until there is nowhere left to hide. First, I understood that someone had signed my name. Then I understood that my son had represented himself as my legal agent. Finally, I understood that hundreds of thousands of dollars had changed hands, and none of it had reached me. I lowered myself into a chair. My son does not have power of attorney. Daniel pulled out another document. According to the closing file, he does. The document had supposedly been signed 11 months earlier and notarized in Buncombe County. It granted Michael authority over my property, finances, medical care, and legal decisions. The reason given was even worse. It stated that I had been experiencing significant cognitive decline following my husband's death. According to the document, I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. They told you I had dementia? Daniel's silence answered me. I stood so quickly that the chair scraped across the wooden floor. I run the bookkeeping for 3 local businesses. I volunteer at the county library twice a week. I drove myself to Knoxville last month for my sister's birthday. Does that sound like someone who cannot manage her affairs? No, ma'am. Then why didn't anyone meet me before buying my home? Daniel's face revealed something I would remember later. It was not guilt exactly. It was recognition. The look of a man realizing that details he had dismissed as unusual might have been warning signs. Your son provided medical documentation, he said. He said moving you would be emotionally difficult, so the family planned to tell you after they had prepared an assisted living apartment. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because sometimes betrayal becomes so enormous that disbelief is the only response your body can produce. What assisted living apartment? I don't know. Your daughter handled that part. My eyes moved from his face back to the documents. My daughter was involved too. Michael had apparently arranged the sale. Allison had apparently arranged my removal. My 2 children had divided the destruction of my life between them as efficiently as household chores. My phone was sitting beside the fruit bowl. For one furious moment, I wanted to call Michael and demand an explanation. I wanted to hear him panic. I wanted to ask how the little boy who once cried because he accidentally broke my favorite coffee mug had grown into a man capable of stealing the roof over my head. But I did not call him. Thomas had always said that anger was valuable information, but terrible leadership. When are you supposed to take possession? I asked. Daniel checked his paperwork. Legally, we already have possession. Demolition was scheduled to begin next Monday. I looked toward the window above the sink. The red barn stood at the far edge of the pasture, glowing in the pale October sunlight. Thomas had rebuilt that barn after a storm tore off half the roof. Michael and Allison had painted it with him one summer when they were teenagers. And in less than a week, strangers planned to tear it down. What are you building here? 12 luxury homes. On 11 acres? The development also includes the neighboring property. That caught my attention. The neighboring land belonged to my late husband's younger brother, Robert. Robert had died 6 months before Thomas, and his land had passed to his only daughter, Claire. Claire lived in Chicago and had repeatedly said she would never sell because her father wanted the 2 properties kept together. Who sold you the neighboring land? Daniel looked back at the folder. A company called Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings. I had never heard of it. Who owns that company? I'm not certain. Our acquisition department handled the transaction. That answer should not have frightened me as much as it did. But suddenly, the situation felt larger than my house. This was not a desperate son making a reckless decision. Someone had prepared legal documents, obtained medical records, forged signatures, created a company, transferred property, and convinced an established developer that I was mentally incapable. The sale of my home was not the beginning of the plan. It was the final step. And whatever my children had done, they had been doing it for much longer than 3 weeks. Daniel agreed to suspend the survey until his company's attorneys reviewed the documents. He could not promise the demolition would be cancelled, but he gave me copies of everything in his file. Before leaving, he stopped at the back door. Mrs. Parker, there is something else you should know. I waited. Your son seemed anxious to close quickly. He accepted almost $90,000 less than our original offer. Why would he do that? He said the family needed immediate access to the money for your medical care. Daniel glanced toward the driveway, making sure the other men could not hear him. But during the closing, your daughter kept asking how soon the funds would clear. She did not ask a single question about where you would live. After he left, I locked the door. Then I checked every window, even though I knew locks would not protect me from people who already possessed keys to my life. I carried the documents into Thomas's old study and spread them across his desk. My first instinct was still to call my children. But another thought stopped me. If Michael and Allison believed I knew nothing, then ignorance was the only advantage I had. I needed to understand the entire plan before they realized it had begun to collapse. So instead of calling either of them, I called my attorney. Her name was Rebecca Sloan, and she had helped Thomas prepare his will 7 years earlier. Rebecca listened without interrupting as I explained what had happened. When I finished, she asked me to photograph every page and send it to her immediately. Do not confront your children, she warned. Do not leave the house, and do not sign anything. I'm going to verify the deed, the power of attorney, and the notary. Can they really take my home? There was a pause. Not legally, if these documents were forged. But Evelyn, whoever arranged this, knew enough about the legal process to make everything appear legitimate. My children arranged it. Maybe, Rebecca said. But I don't think they did it alone. Her words stayed with me after the call ended. At 3:30 that afternoon, Allison called. My daughter rarely called during the workday. She usually sent short text messages between meetings at the real estate agency where she worked. But that afternoon, her voice was unusually cheerful. Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today? The question sounded harmless. It was the kind of question any loving daughter might ask. But after reading a legal document that described me as mentally incompetent, I heard it differently. She was not asking how I felt. She was checking whether anything had happened. I'm fine, I said. Just making pancakes and cleaning the kitchen. That's good. She sounded relieved. Michael and I were talking, and we thought we might come by for dinner tomorrow night. My children had not visited together in more than 6 months. Now, less than a week before strangers planned to demolish my home, they both wanted to have dinner with me. That would be nice, I said. Great. And Mom? Yes? Michael might bring some paperwork. Nothing serious. Just routine documents connected to Dad's estate. I looked down at the forged power of attorney lying on Thomas's desk. Of course, I said calmly. Bring whatever you need. After we hung up, I remained beside the desk, listening to the grandfather clock mark each passing second. They were coming to my house the next evening. They were bringing documents. And they believed I was still the trusting mother who would sign whatever her children placed in front of her. What Michael and Allison did not know was that by the time they arrived, my attorney would be watching from the guest room, a private investigator would be recording every word, and I would finally learn why my own children needed me declared incompetent before Monday morning. By 6 o'clock the next evening, every chair in my dining room had been positioned exactly where Rebecca wanted it. She had arrived through the side entrance shortly after 4, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing jeans instead of the tailored suits I was used to seeing her in. The private investigator came 10 minutes later. His name was Marcus Reed, a former police detective with gray at his temples and the kind of quiet presence that made him easy to overlook. That, Rebecca explained, was exactly why she trusted him. Marcus installed 2 small recording devices. One was hidden inside the cabinet above the dining room doorway. The other sat behind the framed photograph of Thomas and me on our 25th anniversary. The irony was not lost on me. My children were about to explain how they intended to erase my future while standing beneath the photograph of the man who had spent his life protecting it. You do not need to force a confession, Rebecca reminded me. Let them speak. Ask simple questions. Do not reveal what you know until we have enough. I nodded, though my hands were trembling. And if they try to make me sign something? Tell them you want to read it slowly. Ask what every page means. The more they explain, the more useful the recording becomes. Marcus checked his watch. Where will you be? I asked. Upstairs with Ms. Sloane. The guest room vent carries sound from the dining room better than you might expect. Rebecca placed a hand on my arm. Evelyn, if you feel unsafe at any point, say that you need your medication. That is our signal to come downstairs. I almost told her I would be fine. That was what I had always said. When Thomas got sick, I said I would be fine. When Michael's first business failed and he asked us for $20,000, I said I would be fine. When Allison's divorce left her with legal bills she could not pay, I said I would be fine. Being fine had become the language I used whenever the people I loved needed something from me. But that evening, standing in the home they had secretly sold, I understood that being fine had made me useful to people who never expected me to say no. I'll use the signal if I need you, I said. At 6:45, headlights swept across the living room wall. Michael arrived first. He parked beside the old maple tree and stepped out carrying a black leather folder. My son was 38 years old, broad-shouldered like his father, with the same deep-set brown eyes. For years, that resemblance had comforted me. Now it made the betrayal harder to understand. Allison pulled in behind him 2 minutes later. She emerged from her white SUV holding a bottle of red wine and a bakery box tied with string. From a distance, they looked like thoughtful adult children arriving for a family dinner. If anyone had driven past the house at that moment, they would have seen nothing unusual. That was the most frightening part. Betrayal rarely announces itself. Sometimes it carries dessert. Allison hugged me when I opened the door. She held me longer than usual. You look tired, Mom, she said. There it was again. The assessment disguised as concern. I've been busy, I replied. Michael kissed my cheek and glanced past me into the house. His eyes moved from the staircase to the hallway and then toward the kitchen. He was checking whether I was alone. Smells good, he said. Pot roast. Your father's favorite. For the briefest moment, guilt crossed his face. Then it disappeared. We sat down at the dining table just after 7. I had prepared carrots, potatoes, green beans, and the dinner rolls Allison loved as a child. No one mentioned the black folder beside Michael's chair. Not at first. They asked about the weather. They asked whether the creek had risen after the rain. Allison told a story about a difficult client who kept changing her mind about a condo in downtown Asheville. Michael complained about the cost of replacing the transmission in his truck. I listened and nodded, playing the role they had written for me. The aging widow. The cooperative mother. The woman so grateful for company that she would not question why both her children had suddenly made time for dinner. Halfway through the meal, Michael finally reached for the folder. Mom, there's something we need to discuss. Allison placed her fork down and gave me a careful smile. It's nothing bad. People only say that when they know the next sentence will frighten you. What is it? Michael opened the folder and removed several sheets of paper. We've been worried about you living here alone. Why? He glanced at Allison. The property is too much for one person. The maintenance, the taxes, the distance from town. And after Dad died, you haven't exactly been yourself. My fingers tightened around my water glass. In what way? Allison leaned closer. Her voice softened, the way people speak to children or frightened animals. You forget things. What things? Appointments. Conversations. Little details. Give me an example. She hesitated. Last Christmas, you asked me twice what time we were coming for dinner. Because you changed the time twice. Michael exhaled sharply. Mom, this is exactly what we mean. You get defensive whenever we try to help. There was a method to what they were doing. They were not simply lying. They were trying to make my denial look like proof. If I agreed that I was forgetful, they were right. If I insisted I was not, I was defensive and confused. Every possible response led to the same conclusion. I was incompetent. What kind of help are you offering? I asked. Michael pushed the first document toward me. There's a senior community in Hendersonville. It's clean, secure, and close to medical care. The page showed a smiling older couple walking beside a landscaped pond. At the top was the name Mountain View Senior Residences. You want me to move into assisted living? Not assisted living exactly, Allison said quickly. More like independent living with support available. Have either of you visited it? Another pause. We've seen the website, Michael said. And spoken to someone, Allison added. What is the monthly cost? We'll handle that, Michael replied. I looked at him. With what money? Allison's eyes flicked toward the folder. It was a tiny movement, but I saw it. That's part of what we need to discuss, she said. Michael pulled out a second document. Dad left a lot of financial loose ends. Some of the property records need to be updated, and there are tax issues that could become expensive if we don't address them now. What tax issues? Estate taxes, transfer fees, agricultural classifications. He listed the words rapidly, hoping the language would sound complicated enough to discourage questions. But Thomas and I had managed our property taxes for 3 decades. There were no estate taxes due. The deed had transferred cleanly to me after his death. And the agricultural classification had been renewed in January. Michael either did not know that, or he was counting on me not remembering it. What does this document do? It allows us to make some financial decisions on your behalf. Like a power of attorney? His eyes lifted to mine. For the first time that evening, I saw real alarm. Similar, he said. Do you already have one? Silence settled over the table. Allison looked at Michael. Michael looked at the document. It lasted only 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds gave me my answer. They had rehearsed what to say if I resisted. They had not rehearsed what to say if I knew the correct question. No, Michael said finally. That's why we need you to sign this. The lie was now recorded. I picked up the document and pretended to read it slowly. The first page was not a power of attorney. It was a consent agreement acknowledging that I had voluntarily chosen to leave the property by Sunday evening. The second page released Michael and Allison from any responsibility for decisions made regarding my finances. The third stated that I had received full information about the sale of the house and agreed that the proceeds should be placed into a family-managed trust. They were not merely trying to move me. They were trying to manufacture proof that I had approved everything. This says the house has already been sold, I said. Allison's face went pale. Michael recovered first. It's just legal wording. Legal wording that says my home was sold last month. Mom, don't focus on one sentence, Allison said. The important thing is that this protects you. Who bought it? Neither answered. How much did they pay? Michael leaned back in his chair. The concerned son performance was beginning to crack. You don't need to worry about the details. It is my house. It was Dad's house too, he snapped. The room became completely still. There it was. Not concern. Not fear for my health. Resentment. Something old and buried had finally surfaced. Your father left it to me, I said. Because he assumed you'd eventually leave it to us. Eventually is not the same as now. Michael pushed his plate away. What difference does it make? You're one person living on 11 acres. Allison and I have bills, children, mortgages, actual responsibilities. This property is worth more money than you could spend in the rest of your life. Allison reached for his arm. Michael. No, she needs to understand, he said. We've been trying to solve this without upsetting her, but she keeps acting like we're stealing something that will belong to us anyway. My son had just admitted the truth, and he still believed he was the victim. Where is the money? I asked. Allison looked down. Michael's jaw tightened. It's being managed. By whom? By us. How much is left? His silence frightened me more than any answer could have. How much is left, Michael? Allison began twisting her napkin between her fingers. Most of it, she said. Most is not a number. Michael stood. This conversation is going nowhere. Sit down. He stared at me. I could not remember the last time I had spoken to him in that tone. Perhaps I never had. Slowly, he returned to his chair. Did you use the money to pay your debts? I asked. Neither of them moved. That was when I knew. Not all the details. Not yet. But I knew the money was already disappearing. Michael, is your business in trouble again? His expression hardened. My business is not your concern. It became my concern when you sold my home. Allison froze. Michael's face lost all color. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The lie had ended. And they both knew it. Who told you? Allison whispered. Does it matter? Michael stood again, this time with enough force to knock his chair backward. You were not supposed to find out like this. How was I supposed to find out? After you were settled somewhere safe. After the bulldozers arrived? Allison began to cry. At another time, the sight of my daughter crying would have broken me. But those tears were not for me. They were for a plan that was failing. Mom, please, she said. We can explain. Then explain. Michael began pacing beside the table. The property had to be sold quickly. I had investors threatening legal action, and Allison was behind on her mortgage. We were going to replace the money once the development deal paid out. What development deal? He stopped pacing. Allison looked at him sharply. He had said too much. Nothing, she said. He's confused. I am not confused, Michael snapped. Then he looked at me. The developer isn't just buying the land. We have an agreement that gives us a percentage of every household after construction. My mind returned to the neighboring property. To the company Daniel had mentioned. Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings. Is that your company? I asked. Michael's eyes narrowed. How do you know that name? Allison's crying stopped instantly. She turned toward her brother. You said she wouldn't see those documents. She wasn't supposed to. The words came out before either of them could stop them. They had not simply sold my property through a forged power of attorney. They had created a company to control the neighboring land too. And if Claire had never agreed to sell, then my children had not only stolen from me, they had stolen from their cousin. "What did you do to Claire's property?" I asked. Michael's expression changed. His anger vanished. In its place came fear. "We should leave," Allison said. She stood and reached for her purse. I did not stop her. "Did Claire sign anything?" Allison looked toward the front door. Michael grabbed the documents from the table and shoved them back into his folder. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "Then help me understand." He leaned toward me. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own son. "This development is worth millions. It fixes everything. My business, Allison's house, college funds for the kids, all of it. You and Claire were sitting on land that could change the entire family's future, and neither of you was willing to do anything with it. So you forged our signatures?" "We made a decision you would have made eventually." "Claire is 41 years old. She lives in Chicago. How did you declare her incompetent?" Allison whispered his name. A warning. But Michael was too angry to hear it. "We didn't have to," he said. "The land was transferred before Uncle Robert died." My heart began pounding. Robert had been seriously ill during the final months of his life. He had spent weeks in and out of the hospital. During that time, Michael had often volunteered to drive him to appointments. I had believed it was kindness. Now I understood that my son had been gaining access to medical documents, to signatures, to a dying man's trust. "What did you make Robert sign?" Michael stepped back. He finally seemed to realize how much he had revealed. "We're done here." He turned toward the doorway. That was when Rebecca came down the stairs. Marcus followed behind her. Michael stopped so suddenly that Allison walked into him. For one perfect second, neither of them seemed capable of breathing. Rebecca reached the bottom step and held up her phone. "Actually," she said, "I think we're just getting started." Michael's eyes moved from Rebecca's phone to the small recording device in Marcus's hand. The anger drained from his face so quickly that he seemed to age in front of me. Allison gripped the strap of her purse with both hands. "You recorded us?" she asked. Rebecca stepped into the dining room. Mrs. Parker recorded a conversation inside her own home after discovering that her property had been transferred using documents she said she never signed. Michael looked at me. Not with shame. Not with regret. With betrayal. As though I had violated some sacred trust by refusing to let him steal from me quietly. "You set us up." "No," I said. "I gave you a chance to tell the truth." Marcus moved between Michael and the front door. He did not touch him. He did not need to. "Nobody is being detained," Marcus said. "But I suggest you leave calmly." Michael laughed bitterly. "You think a recording changes anything? The sale is complete. The developer owns the land." Rebecca's expression remained steady. A forged deed does not become legal simply because money changed hands. For the first time, Allison turned on her brother. "You said the documents were protected." "They are." "Then why is her attorney standing here?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Because somebody talked." The sentence changed the room. Rebecca heard it too. "Who else knows?" she asked. Michael said nothing. Allison looked toward the floor. That small movement was enough. There was another person. Someone they feared more than they feared me. Michael left first. He shoved the front door open and crossed the porch without looking back. Allison followed more slowly. At the threshold, she turned toward me. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was hard. "You could have helped us. You never asked. You would have said no. Then you already knew it was wrong." She flinched. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she whispered something that stayed with me long after the door closed. "You don't know what Michael owes." Then she walked away. Rebecca waited until both vehicles disappeared down the driveway before speaking. "That was not just about business debt." Marcus agreed. He was afraid before he knew about the recording. People who are only worried about money usually try to negotiate. He was worried about exposure. Rebecca gathered the documents left on the table. "We file for an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. That should stop the demolition and freeze further transfers." "And Claire's land?" "We contact her tonight." I had Claire's number, but I had not spoken to her in nearly 4 months. When she answered, traffic noise hummed in the background. "Aunt Evelyn? Is everything okay? I need to ask you something about your father's property." The traffic noise stopped. Claire had apparently pulled over. "What about it? Did Robert transfer the land before he died?" Her answer came immediately. "No. His will left it to me." Rebecca closed her eyes. It was the answer we expected, but hearing it made everything worse. I explained what Daniel had told me about Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings. Claire remained silent for so long that I thought the call had disconnected. Then she said, "Michael visited Dad in the hospital the week before he died. He told me he was taking him to an appointment. There was no appointment. Dad called me afterward. He said Michael brought papers for him to sign, but he couldn't remember what they were." A chill moved through me. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because Dad was on heavy medication. I thought he was confused." The same excuse had protected Michael twice. A dying man was confused. A grieving widow was forgetful. Anyone who threatened the plan could be described as mentally unreliable. Rebecca took the phone. She asked Claire to find her father's will, recent bank statements, hospital records, and any documents connected to the property. When the call ended, she looked at me. "Your son may have committed fraud against 2 estates. With Allison's help." "Yes. But they still needed a notary, medical documentation, and someone who knew how to move property through a shell company." I thought of Allison's career in real estate. She knew agents, title companies, lenders, and closing attorneys. But even she would not have access to medical records or a doctor willing to describe me as cognitively impaired. Then I remembered something. 6 months earlier, Allison had insisted that I attend a wellness appointment at a private clinic in Hendersonville. She said it was a gift. A full health evaluation for women over 60. The physician had asked strange questions. What day was it? Who was president? Could I remember 5 words and repeat them later? I had answered everything correctly. Yet 2 weeks afterward, Allison told me the clinic had misplaced part of my paperwork. "I know where the medical documentation came from," I said. The clinic was called Carolina Senior Wellness. Rebecca searched the name on her laptop. The medical director was Dr. Nathan Cole. I recognized him immediately. He had attended Allison's wedding 12 years earlier. At the time, she introduced him as a longtime family friend of her husband. But Allison had been divorced for 3 years. I had no idea she still knew him. Marcus leaned over the screen. "I know that name." He searched through a database on his tablet. After several minutes, he turned the screen toward us. Dr. Cole had been investigated by the State Medical Board 2 years earlier for signing competency evaluations without completing full examinations. The complaint had been dismissed after the patient's families refused to cooperate. Rebecca read the summary twice. This may be our missing person. Marcus shook his head. He is part of it, but he probably isn't running it. Doctors do not usually create shell companies and negotiate development agreements. A new thought formed. Daniel said Michael accepted less than the original offer because he needed money quickly. What if the development company was not the first buyer? Rebecca looked at me. What are you thinking? What if Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings acquired both properties first and then sold them together? Marcus began searching corporate records. Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings had been registered 14 months earlier. Its mailing address was a private mailbox in Asheville. The registered organizer was not Michael. It was not Allison. It was a local attorney named Charles Whitmore. Rebecca's expression changed the moment she saw the name. Do you know him? I asked. Everyone in property law knows him. He handles high-value land acquisitions across western North Carolina. Would he help them forge documents? Not unless the reward was enormous. Marcus opened another record. Charles Whitmore was also the closing attorney who certified the sale of my property. The same attorney had verified Michael's power of attorney, accepted Dr. Cole's medical evaluation, organized the shell company, and transferred the neighboring land. He was not simply helping my children. He had built the structure around them. And according to a financial disclosure Marcus found, Whitmore's wife owned 12% of Willow Creek Development Group. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. There it is. The properties had been acquired at a discount through fraudulent documents. Then they were transferred to a developer connected to the attorney who approved the transactions. Michael and Allison would receive part of the future profits. Whitmore's family would receive the rest. My children had not designed the scheme. They had been recruited into it. And if Michael was terrified, it was because people with far more money and influence were depending on him to keep me silent. The following morning, Rebecca filed the emergency motion at the Buncombe County Courthouse. By 10:30, a judge had temporarily blocked demolition, construction, and any further transfer of either property. By noon, the developer's attorneys were calling Rebecca. By 1, Charles Whitmore called me directly. His voice was calm and polished. Mrs. Parker, I believe there has been an unfortunate family misunderstanding. Forged deeds are not misunderstandings. That is a serious accusation. Then you should be careful what you say next. There was a brief silence. Your children were acting out of concern for your well-being. Is that what they told you? They provided valid documentation. Documentation your office prepared. His tone cooled. I'm calling to offer a practical resolution. The development company is prepared to increase the purchase price substantially. You could walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. I was already living comfortably. Mrs. Parker, litigation can take years. It can destroy families. My family sold my home while I was still living in it. I think the destruction has already begun. His friendliness disappeared. You should consider how an extended competency dispute might affect your reputation. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. If I challenged the sale, they would publicly argue that I had dementia. They would use the forged medical report to make every statement I gave look unreliable. Are you threatening to have me declared incompetent? I am explaining the legal realities. Then let me explain one to you. My attorney is listening. Whitmore hung up. Rebecca had indeed been listening from the extension. She entered the room carrying her legal pad. He is scared. He did not sound scared. Powerful men rarely do. They sound reasonable right up until the moment they realize reason will not protect them. Her phone rang before she finished speaking. It was Claire. She had found a bank statement among her father's papers. 3 days before Robert died, $200,000 had been deposited into an account in his name. The next morning, every dollar had been transferred to Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings. The transaction description read property purchase. But the signature authorizing the transfer was not Robert's. It belonged to the person who had been added as a joint account holder just 1 week earlier. Claire sent us a photograph. When I enlarged it, I expected to see Michael's name. Instead, I saw Allison's. My daughter had not merely helped her brother. She had taken control of a dying man's bank account, transferred the money into the shell company, and hidden the evidence from the cousin who trusted her. But the statement revealed something even more disturbing. The $200,000 had not come from Whitmore or the development company. It had come from an account belonging to Mountain View Senior Residences, the same facility my children planned to move me into. And when Marcus searched its ownership records, we discovered that Mountain View was not simply a retirement community. It was owned by Dr. Nathan Cole and Charles Whitmore. That was when we finally understood the full plan. They did not only take property from elderly people. They placed those people inside a facility they controlled, declared them incompetent, and used their own legal and medical authority to keep them from ever getting their property back. The discovery transformed what had looked like a family betrayal into something far more dangerous. Rebecca contacted the state attorney general's office that afternoon. Marcus forwarded the corporate records, medical board complaint, property transfers, and bank statements to a financial crimes investigator he had worked with years earlier. By sunset, 2 investigators were sitting at my kitchen table. They asked me to describe every conversation with Michael, Allison, Dr. Cole, and Charles Whitmore. They copied the recording from the dinner and listened in silence as my son explained that he had made a decision I would have made eventually. When the recording ended, one investigator looked at Rebecca. This is not their first property. He opened a folder containing 8 names. Each belonged to an older resident of Western North Carolina. Each had entered Mountain View Senior Residences during the previous 4 years. And each had transferred a home, business, or piece of land shortly before being declared unable to manage personal finances. Several had no close family. 2 had died inside the facility. One woman had repeatedly claimed that her nephew and Dr. Cole were stealing from her, but her complaints had been dismissed as symptoms of dementia. I stared at the list. My children had convinced themselves they were solving financial problems. But Whitmore and Cole had turned greed into a business model. They found families under pressure, offered them quick money, and provided every document necessary to make theft look like responsible caregiving. Then they moved the victim somewhere their objections could be controlled. What happens now? I asked. We need them to believe they still have a way out, the investigator said. The next morning, Rebecca contacted Whitmore and told him I was willing to discuss a settlement. He suggested meeting at his office. Rebecca refused. Instead, we met in a private conference room at a hotel near downtown Nashville. Whitmore arrived with Dr. Cole. Michael and Allison came 5 minutes later. My children would not look at me. Whitmore placed a thick agreement on the table. He offered me $900,000, a private apartment at Mountain View, and full payment of my living expenses for the rest of my life. In exchange, I would withdraw my legal challenge and confirm that every earlier document had been signed voluntarily. You are offering to pay me with money stolen from other people, I said. Whitmore smiled. I am offering you peace. Dr. Cole opened another folder. Mrs. Parker, prolonged stress can worsen memory problems. Continuing this dispute may not be healthy for you. Are you diagnosing me again? He did not answer. Michael finally looked up. Mom, take the offer. Please. Why? So all of you can keep doing this? Allison began crying. We did not know about the other families. Whitmore turned toward her. The warning in his expression was immediate. But Allison had already started. He told us this was legal, she said. He said families do it all the time when parents refuse to make responsible decisions. Stop talking, Whitmore ordered. Michael pushed back his chair. No. You said nobody would get hurt. Whitmore's calm expression finally disappeared. Both of you signed every agreement. Both of you accepted money. Do not pretend you are victims now. That was the moment the conference room door opened. 3 investigators entered, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Whitmore stared at Rebecca. Then he noticed the small recording device beside her legal pad. For the first time since I had heard his name, Charles Whitmore looked powerless. The investigation lasted 11 months. Whitmore and Dr. Cole were charged with conspiracy, fraud, exploitation of vulnerable adults, forgery, and money laundering. Authorities identified 14 disputed property transfers connected to Mountain View senior residences. The facility was placed under emergency management, and every resident received an independent medical and legal review. Several families recovered homes they had believed were permanently lost. Michael and Allison both accepted plea agreements. They admitted to forging documents, taking money from Robert's estate, and helping transfer my property. Because they cooperated with investigators, neither received the maximum sentence. But cooperation did not erase what they had done. Michael served time in county custody and was ordered to repay the investors he had deceived. Allison lost her real estate license and received a suspended sentence with strict probation. The money from my house was traced through several accounts. Some had paid Michael's debts. Some had covered Allison's overdue mortgage. The rest was recovered before Whitmore could move it overseas. The sale was cancelled. Claire's property was returned to her. And the bulldozers never reached Willow Creek Road. For months after the case became public, reporters called my house. They wanted interviews about the corrupt attorney, the dishonest doctor, and the retirement facility that had trapped vulnerable people. But the question they asked most often was the one I found hardest to answer. How could a mother forgive her own children? The truth was that forgiveness did not happen all at once. It was not a door I opened or a sentence I spoke. It was a boundary. I could stop carrying hatred without pretending trust still existed. I could love the children I remembered without giving the adults they became access to everything they had tried to take. Michael wrote to me from custody. His first letters were full of explanations. His business was collapsing. His investors were threatening him. Whitmore had manipulated him. By the 6th letter, the explanations stopped. He finally wrote one honest sentence. I believed being your son gave me a right to what was yours. I kept that letter. Not because it repaired anything, but because it was the first time he understood the real crime. Allison visited me nearly a year after the dinner. She stood on the porch holding no wine, no dessert, and no documents. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. Good, I replied. Because forgiveness is not something you get to schedule. We sat on the porch for almost 2 hours. She told me the truth without asking me to make it smaller. That was not reconciliation. But it was a beginning. Today, the farmhouse still stands beneath the oak trees. Claire and I placed both properties into a conservation trust so they can never again be sold without full independent review. The red barn has been repaired. The creek still rises after heavy rain. And every Sunday morning, I make blueberry pancakes in the same kitchen where a stranger once told me I no longer own my life. For years, I believed protecting a family meant solving problems quietly and giving until everyone felt secure. I know better now. Love without boundaries is not always kindness. Sometimes it becomes permission. My children nearly erased me because they mistook my generosity for weakness and my trust for blindness. They learned too late that I was neither weak nor blind. I had simply loved them enough to believe they would never force me to choose between being their mother and protecting myself. When they finally forced that choice, I chose the truth. And the truth saved not only my home, but people I had never met. That is why I no longer feel ashamed that my own children betrayed me. Their choices belong to them. What belongs to me is the life I protected afterward. A life built on land that is still mine, memories that no forged signature can transfer, and one lesson I will never forget. The people who love you may inherit your belongings someday. But they do not inherit the right to decide when your life is over.